This episode of the WPAOG podcast features a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Robert Beale, class of 2002. Beale is the 2022 WPAOG Alexander R Nininger Award winner and currently serves at U.S. Army Special Operations Aviation Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The WPAOG Nininger Award is presented annually to a graduate who is an example of heroic action in battle and is funded by a generous endowment from E. Doug Kenna, class of 1945, and his wife Jean. The award is named in honor of Lieutenant Alexander R. Sandy Nininger Jr., class of 1941, the first recipient of the Medal of Honor in World War II. In this episode, Rob talks with 2021 Nininger Award winner Colonel James Enos, class of 2000, and shares how his experiences in programs at West Point, to include Margin of Excellence opportunities, helped prepare him for his valiant military career. He provides insight on what's required to excel and navigate the trials and tribulations of 12 deployments. Rob also explains his take on the Warrior Ethos, the importance of relationships in supporting mental health, and why mentorship through the long gray line has been principal to his personal success. You can learn more about the Nininger Award and WPAOG's programs at WPAOG.org. Now, please enjoy this interview with Nininger Award winners Lieutenant Colonel Rob Beale and Colonel James Enos.
Welcome to an episode of the West Point AOG podcast. I'm Colonel James Enos, USMA 2000, and I'm here with Lieutenant Colonel Rob Beale, USMA 2002, who is the 2022 recipient of the Alexander R Nininger Award. Rob, welcome and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this humbling honor from the Association of Graduates and for getting this opportunity to speak with you today. Appreciate it.
We're just two Nininger Award winners having a chat over a couple of beers. I know that you'll spend a lot of time over the next few days talking about the events of September 14th, 2011. And I'm sure like you or like me and the other 15 awardees who feel like they were just doing their job. So let's just talk about West Point for a little while. So what drew you to West Point? Where did this desire to serve your country come from?
Well, I've always had a profound love for the country. I was born and raised just outside of Philadelphia, so got to see where the Constitution, Declaration of Independence was written. Have military service in my family. Grandparents were in World War II in the Navy and the Army, and uncle served in the Army Chaplain Corps, retired a few years ago. My grandfather on my mother's side, he actually took me down to the Naval Academy of all places in 9th grade, trying to encourage me to consider applying to that fine institution, the Navy. And he had me convinced, and I was very interested in going into one of the service academies. It wasn't until a couple years later when it came time for the summer leader seminar or experience, I think is what it's called today, and got to spend a week at West Point between 11th grade and 12th grade. And got to spend a week here and just experience what it was like to be a cadet, do some physical fitness, do some classes, get to see the academy. And it was at that particular moment I was hooked. And I literally applied to two schools. I applied Naval Academy and West Point, got accepted to both, and chose the better choice going to West Point. So got to start that in 1998. Super proud to have been able to be part of that class, 2002.
Yeah, that's great. So while you were a cadet at West Point, who are your mentors? How did they shape what you wanted to do in the Army and influence you to become an aviator?
I had multiple mentors. Not all of them were aviators. Probably one of the highlights of my time at West Point was being a member of the Army crew team. And most of the coaches were active duty faculty, plus a couple civilians. Dave Kamen was my first coach. He was an aviation officer. I was very interested in what he did and kind of how he became an Army aviator. I also had others that were infantry. I had field artillery, Bill Reinhardt, Andy Hall, Stas Przewski, who was field artillery. Just getting those opportunities to interact with them on a more relaxed, personal way on our racing events or regattas, also during practice. I was blessed to have as a TAC Tony Burgess, who is one of the preeminent experts in leadership, written many books and does seminars. So I had him for 1 year as my TAC and C2 and just really saw what a leader was. in him. And then my aviation mentor was a Major Wiley Thompson who worked in dirt. And he was actually my dirt professor at one point. And so he kind of helped me get through the aviation branch and educated me about warrant officers. Eventually, several years later, he was my brigade XO over in Germany and when we deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I would say those are some of the individuals that helped influence me.
You've been on more than a dozen combat deployments. What at West Point really helped prepare you most for the rigors of combat?
Some may hate for me to say this, but Camp Buckner was a pretty exciting experience. Years later, I felt like I was at Camp Buckner when we were on FOB Salerno, FOB, Balad, whatever it was. So got to experience that kind of living, that camaraderie that occurs in that type of environment. Obviously, the military training we did get to do CTLT with 2 aviation units. Got to go work with the German aviation unit for CTLT, and then for a AIID with the Department of Foreign Languages, and then also did CTLT with an air defense unit, but got to go touch aviation a bit while I was over there. That was a great experience. Also, just having guest speakers come and talk to us about what they were experiencing in Bosnia and Kosovo, because for most of my time here, it was pre 9/11. So the bulk of the experience was Kosovo, Bosnia. We had a couple guys that had served in Desert Storm, and then we had our older professors that were Vietnam veterans. So really, just learning from those young captains who graduated just a few years before we did.
Right. So you kind of mentioned that, right? You were a cadet on September 11th. Mm-hmm. So actually a firstie and getting ready to graduate in a few months. Especially now that the graduating class is not entering an army or war. How did that affect you and your classmates, and what would you like to pass on to them?
Obviously, it had a profound impact on our life. We were kind of like the cadets are right now. We were just 2 weeks away from branch selection. The firsties became very laser focused. We had a purpose. We had a mission. We had to go after the folks that went after us and killed the nearly 3,000 at the Pentagon, the World Trade Center in Pennsylvania. I don't have the exact statistics, but there was a significant change from branch choices from, let's say, military intelligence, air defense, or artillery, or whatever, and then a huge swing towards infantry. So much so that we had more request infantry than had available slots. So we ended up getting them from the ROTC programs. So we had quite a few folks that branch infantry in lieu of another branch they may have chosen. And it just, the campus changed overnight. Back in those days, it was an open campus. You could just drive through the gate. The gate was there, but there was no inspections or ID cards or anything. And then we went to seeing the infantry battalion here, the military police carrying M4s, setting up, machine gun posts throughout the installation. And so it was a pretty significant emotional event for all of us. The planes flew over top of West Point on their way down to the World Trade Center. So really, it was quite an event.
Yeah. So when people ask me what makes West Point different, I always tell them it's the friends and the connections that you make while you're here. You may not have talked to a classmate in 20 years, but when you get together again, it feels like you just saw them yesterday. How have you leveraged and relied on these connections and friendships in your career and even in life?
I will reference a little bit of this in my speech tomorrow, but we go through the 47-month experience. It is a shared experience that few have done. And when we get those opportunities to reconnect with some classmates, maybe some we haven't seen in 20 years, it's almost like we just saw them yesterday. It is that great of an experience. I've a few close friends that I have remained in touch with over the 20 years. And sometimes they're available to give me advice. Sometimes they'll talk me off the ledge if I'm getting fired up about something. Sometimes we'll just talk about the Army-Navy game or something like that. But they're always great folks to bounce ideas off of and, have great interactions with them. In my last job, I was blessed to have multiple West Pointers as battalion commanders on the installation I was at. So I was able to reach out to friends, to classmates who, if we needed some assistance with something, they could do the same to us. So just having that network was super valuable as a battalion commander. Every West Point graduate I've gotten to work with, you just know what's in their DNA. You know who they are.
You mentioned your 20 years of service to the Army, right? And you just finished that. I have to laugh a little bit because one of the criteria for the Nininger Award is to be a relatively recent graduate. So I do appreciate that AOG considers us both recent graduates, even though it doesn't feel like that sometimes in the morning. What has been some defining moments throughout your Army career?
I've got a few. I deployed for the first time in late 2003 to Iraq, and I was in Balad. I was in a bit of a staff role, and we got hit by rockets and mortars 3 or 4 times a day. And you can't replicate that at Camp Buckner or NTC or whatever, where you could actually lose your life. So just getting over there and experiencing that and experiencing the massive war machine that we actually have, the capability the United States Army or the United States Department of Defense has, it was absolutely incredible. Then, later, a couple years later, I went and did an Afghanistan deployment for a year. And my first job was I was an aviation platoon leader in FOB Salerno, which is in eastern Afghanistan. And I was alone and unafraid. I had a platoon, I had 3 Blackhawks, and we were doing missions every day. We were doing what I had signed up to do. It truly was a great experience. That's what motivated me to go special ops after that assignment. During that deployment, there was a MH-47 that was shot down, tail number 146 on June 28, 2005, that killed a bunch of Navy SEALs and a bunch of Night Stalkers. And that occurred just only a handful of miles away from where I was at that time. And just seeing the devastation and just the response, it made me I wanted to do what those guys were doing, because they were not going to leave that fallen comrade. They were going to put that mission first. Like, that is what, may they rest in peace. That is the kind of people I wanted to work with. 1 year after that event, on June 28th, 2006, which coincidentally is my birthday, I happened to get picked up for the 160th. And that started my career in Special Ops Aviation, all the way from platoon leader up to most recently battalion commander. And I would say that was probably the biggest single impact on my career, because that has been my trajectory since 2006.
Yeah, one aspect of being an Army officer is to mentor junior officers. You mentioned some of your mentors while you're here at West Point, but being on the flip side now, what has your experience been like mentoring not only West Point graduates, but ROTC graduates? And as an aviator, you also have a group of warrant officers who sometimes have much more experience and
most of the time,
and are much better pilots than any of us could be.
Absolutely.
So how have you mentored them, and what's that been like for you?
I'll hit the warrant officers last. I did 2 years as an ROTC professor of military science, and that was really my first assignment in the Army where I was getting to work directly with cadets. Granted, not West Point cadets, but still a fantastic program down at Temple University, ROTC. Go Owls. You talked about how we're old because we graduated 20 plus years ago. Well, those cadets made me feel young because they had their entire future ahead of them. They had 180-degree field of view of what they wanted to do. Whereas, at our level, we kind of know like there's about a 2-degree field of view of what we're going to do with the rest of our career. So it was super refreshing. They were just hungry for experiences, for stories, for how do I get to do X? How do I get to do Y? What do I need to do to get to that point? So that was, probably the most valuable part of that kind of a job. And ultimately, these cadets, these young NCOs, these warrant officers, the young ones, like those are our legacy. I can have my S3 draft up a fantastic op order. We can have a great, flight lead evaluation. But at the end of the day, no one's going to care about that. They're going to care about the lieutenant, the captain that we got to mentor, who is then going to eventually be the commander, battalion commander, brigade commander, whatever down the road. So that is probably the most valuable thing. With the warrant officers, they're an interesting animal. They're a mix of high school to flight school, prior enlisted NCOs. There's even captains that are becoming warrant officers. So they come with all sorts of different backgrounds, and they are charged with being the technical and tactical experts of aviation. Really, we talk about the NCO. The NCOs are the backbone of the Army, and I will not ever argue that. But in the aviation community, the warrant officers, they are your continuity. They are the ones that are, I'm going to be in command for a year or two. I'm going to be replaced with someone else. But those warrants are going to stay there for a very long time. And they have just as much mentorship role over the platoon leaders and the captains as we do. In fact, they probably have more because they're the ones flying with them every day. They're the ones giving them advice on how to progress eventually. So, I love my warrants. Some of my best mentors in the Army during my Army time have been warrant officers, and I call many of them friends, very close friends. So truly just blessed to have been surrounded by such great ones.
So you get a chance to talk to the entire Corps of Cadets. I know I never saw myself doing that. What do you hope to pass on to these future leaders, and even more broadly, the entire long gray line who may be listening and watching it?
One of the things I'm going to focus on in the speech is the internalization of the Warrior Ethos. And that may sound cliched because we're supposed to memorize it and know it. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. Those are the 4 tenets of the Warrior Ethos. My story that I'll tell tomorrow and during the cadet engagements, and we met all 4 of those during that Kazovac mission. The 2 that I'm going to specifically hit on are I will never quit and I will never leave a fallen comrade. And, something that I'm seeing a lot of challenge with some of our veterans is resilience. And how do they build resilience after deploying multiple times, seeing some of their best friends killed in action, coming back from a deployment, and they have to be reintegrated back into the real world? Those are the kind of things that we're all challenged with. And, I will never quit. That's the Night Stalker motto is Night Stalkers don't quit. That is something that I want to make sure I relay tomorrow during the speech. And then never leaving a fallen comrade. We have a scourge of veteran suicides ever since GWAT started. Probably 5 or 6 times more veterans have committed suicide than have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what I'm talking about, never leaving a fallen comrade. We have to phone our friends. We have to stay in touch with them, be available to them when they're having challenges. That's really what I'm hitting on, never leave a fallen comrade.
Yeah, those are all great points that I think the Corps will definitely appreciate. So I get to talk to you early in the week, and trust me, by Saturday afternoon, you're going to be exhausted.
Great.
What is the one thing that you're looking forward to doing while you're back here at West Point?
Probably the best part is just going to be the interaction with the cadets, getting the opportunity to tell my story and trying to remember what it was like to be in their shoes. I want to feel like it was only 1 or 2 years ago, but it's over 20 years at this point. And I'm really curious what the cadets are thinking. Like, what is important to them? What is on their mind? Back in our day, on our mind was Kosovo, was Bosnia, was all these great broadening opportunities we may have. And then 9/11 hit. Just having those opportunities to interact with those cadets. And hopefully, if I can just inspire one cadet to commit to a lifetime of selfless service to their nation, then I will see this week as a success.
Yeah. So going back to your time at West Point, what was one maybe tradition or thing that you liked and always remembered about West Point that you hope still continues today, even though the Corps cadets may change a little bit? What's that one thing that you hope kind of stayed?
This might actually be a strange one. I like when the cadets call minutes. I think that's exciting. I like when they're all in sync. I'm a Christian man. I'm, God is important in my life, and I made it a point to the greatest extent possible to attend church services every week here at the Cadet Chapel. And I'm also a musician. I grew up playing music and just love music for some reason. And every chapel service, they would do the doxology, and then they'd follow that by the last verse of "My Country 'Tis a Thee." And our fathers, God, to the author of liberty, to thee we sing. And just hearing that massive pipe organ and everyone singing it, I don't know what it is. It just it chills in the back of my neck. My hair stands up in the back of my neck, and it gives me chills. And, I think of that particular stanza every time I'm in a tough way. I think of that, and it just keeps me going.
That's great. Yeah. How some of the small things over that 47-month experience really stick with us and you continue to take with you today. Mm-hmm. So that's great. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I appreciate what you did that day, what you do every day as you continue to serve our country. I look forward to listening to your speech tomorrow night and hearing what you have to say to the Corps. Mm-hmm. You're truly a great representation of the long gray line and how it will never fail us.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the honor and getting to speak with you, who also a great exemplar of the long gray line. I do need to put the plug in, Pride in All We Do, class of 2002, and go Army, beat Navy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.